No, I don't. No, no. I guess it's all Greek to me. Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of World History. Thank you so much for watching. I may not speak Greek, but that's okay because the first civilization to live in Greece didn't either. But we'll get to that in a minute. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the geography of ancient Greece. We're going to talk about the first civilizations that lived there and how the geography really influenced how people lived there. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at this map right here. As you can see, Greece is a peninsula. Peninsula is an area of land surrounded by water, almost surrounded by water, at least on three sides. Running down the middle of this peninsula are the Pindos Mountains, and you can also see that there is a lot of islands in Greece surrounded by the Aegean Sea. So you've got a peninsula with a lot of mountains, a lot of water. So how does that influence how the ancient Greeks lived? Let's start by thinking about culture. Now, when two groups of people live very close to each other, they tend to have very similar cultures. In Greece, that's not the case. Remember the mountains running down the peninsula and the large amount of water in between the islands? People did not interact as often as, say, people in Egypt or Mesopotamia, where it was very easy to travel in between city-states. Because of this, the cultures that develop in Greece are very different from each other. For example, people didn't think of themselves as Greek. They would say, hey, I'm Spartan, or hey, I'm Athenian, or hey, I'm Delian, or Corinthian. There was not this idea of Greece. In fact, the biggest thing these groups of people had in common was the language they spoke. And that's why historians talk about it as one group, because they all spoke Greek. They had different governments that governed themselves. Sparta had an oligarchy and a king, and that made it decisions for Sparta. However, they did not make decisions for Athens. Athens had its own government that made decisions for Athens. Because of this, Greeks spent more time fighting each other typically than actually helping each other out. And you're going to see this when we talk about the Peloponnesian Wars. Another way geography influenced the ancient Greeks is because it's not easy to farm in the mountains, and the flat land that was in Greece did not have the best soil. So they had to find ways to gather food. They had to find ways to get food and materials to their city-states. And so they became very good at trading. They also set up colonies that were good areas for finding food and resources. If you don't remember what a colony is, you can check out this video right here. If you're looking at this on an iPhone or an iPad where that link's not going to work, the link's down in the description. You can find it there. Finally, the Greeks became very good at traveling at sea. They respected the sea. They thought the sea was a dangerous place, and sailing at this time was a pretty dangerous adventure. They would, for example, only sail during the day. They would set anchor at night. They didn't have maps that told them where to go. The only way they were able to tell where they were was by looking at the stars. So typically, Greeks sailed very close to land, where they could see the land to give them an idea of where they were actually at. Wow, that's some awesome hair right there. Yeah, that's not better. What? All right, there we go. So if on a test, for example, somebody asked you, hey, how does geography influence Greece? You could point to three things. Isolated cultures that were very different from each other. You could talk about trading and how the Greeks had to trade for their food and resources. And then you could talk about how they became expert sailors. If you really wanted to talk about food, you could talk about the fact that they had a lot of seafood in their diet, being so close to the ocean. So let's talk about two of the first civilizations in ancient Greece that had a huge influence on the whole Aegean Sea. These were the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. Now, the Minoans created an advanced society, a civilization, on the island of Crete. Because they lived on the sea, they became expert sailors, very, very good shipbuilders. These ships traded all along the Aegean Sea and carried things like wood and olive oil and pottery. And then they traded these things for silver and copper and gold and jewels. The Minoans are where we get the legend of the Minotaur. Get it? Minoans Minotaur, yeah. And then they disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear. There was a volcano that exploded. It spread ash along Crete, ruining crops, probably killed some people, and they lost a lot of power after that. Whoa, how did I get here? Anyway, so the Minoans were not considered the first Greeks to live in Greece because you know what? They did not speak Greek. The first people that we consider Greek to live in Greece were the Mycenaeans. Now, the Myceneans are a group of people that lived on mainland Greece. They built a lot of big fortresses. The biggest fortress is at Mycenae, which is where we get the name Mycenaean. When the Minoans lost power, this left Crete open for the Mycenaeans to take over, and they did. And they became a big trading force in the region. They traded along the Aegean Sea, they traded along the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. They set up colonies in northern Greece. They set up colonies all the way in Italy. Really powerful people. And they were really big into trading. But maybe not trading the way you and I think of trading. They did not necessarily think that trading had to be a peaceful process. They conquered a lot of neighboring kingdoms. In fact, the Iliad, written about the Trojan War, was probably about the war between Troy and the Mycenaeans. So you can see this is a really big, important people in Greece. But they too eventually lose power. Around 1200 BCE, attacks from the north in Europe and possibly some earthquakes. Hey, it's funny how nature can change the course of history, isn't it? The Mycenaeans lose power. This plunges Greece into a dark age. We'll talk about dark ages later. But eventually, city-states start to rise up, which is something we'll talk about next time. Were you paying attention? Answer the next couple of questions to find out. Name 3 ways that the people in ancient Greece were affected by their geography. Why are the Minoans not considered Greek by historians? And finally, why were the Mycenaeans able to take over Crete? All right, the story of the Minotaur. So the way the story goes is that Minos was the king of Crete, but he needed to prove that he was more powerful than his brothers. So he asked the god Poseidon for help. Poseidon sends a bull, this beautiful white bull, to Minos to prove that he has the god's favor. But it's expected that Minos will then sacrifice the bull to Poseidon. Minos thinks this bull is just amazing and he doesn't want to sacrifice it. So instead he sacrifices the best bull in his herd to Poseidon instead. When Poseidon realizes that he didn't do what he was supposed to do, he decides he needs to punish Minos. So what Poseidon does is he makes Minos' wife fall in love with the bull. Weird. And then what happens is there's a child born. And the child of Minos' wife has the head of a bull, the tail of a bull, and the body of a man. And this is where the Minotaur comes from. Now, the Minotaur was causing a lot of problems in Crete. So they built this huge labyrinth, which is a fancy word for maze, that would keep the Minotaur trapped. And then they made sacrifices to the Minotaur. They would send people from Athens into the labyrinth to be killed by the Minotaur. Along comes the hero of our story, Theseus. Now, Theseus decides he wants to save the Athenians who are in the labyrinth, but there's a problem. How is he going to find his way out? When he gets to Crete, Ariadne, Minos' daughter, falls in love with Theseus. And Ariadne says, you know what? I can tell you how to kill the Minotaur and I can tell you how to get out of the maze if you take me with you when you leave. And Theseus says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So Ariadne gives him a ball of yarn and a sword to kill the Minotaur with. Now, as Theseus goes through the maze, he unravels this yarn so that he knows his way back out when he gets to the center of the maze. He kills the Minotaur, he saves the Athenians, he leaves the labyrinth, he takes Ariadne with him when he leaves. So what does Ariadne get in return for her help? Theseus leaves her on an island and leaves, leaving Ariadne on the island. Hey, thanks for the help, Ariadne. And that's how Greek mythology goes. Always a happy ending.